Today, I come to you as a young person, as a young woman, as a young black woman, to ask you to use us, use the young people of the United States of America to pave a road that will last forever, pave a road that will let us become the foot soldiers, let us not have to do this again for our children. We ask you to let us come forth with you, not behind you, not in front of you, but together on that road to jobs, justice, and peace.
I'm Garrett McQueen.
I'm Scott Blankenship.
And this is TRILLOQUY, the podcast hosted by two men who don't hate women, unlike certain legislations, it seems like, right?
Yeah, it's coming up.
We have some very unfortunate things to have to talk about in the final movement today. We're here. This is the last opus of TRILLOQUY for Women's History Month. Mm-hmm. This is dropping on the final day of March. As much as we love to champion women, you know, I've learned so much personally this month that I didn't know before, between some of the music you've brought in and documentaries I've watched on my own time. As much as we love that, it's painful, but I think necessary to name these issues that impact women specifically, disproportionately, especially as men. Yeah. Silence is violence when it comes to racial equity and also when it comes to gender equity. So
I think so too.
We're going to name some things today. How are you feeling today?
Better than last week, I can tell you that. We had 70 degrees today, but talk about a bad hair day. 50-mile-per-hour winds and all the garbage in the neighborhood pools by my house, you know, by the garage. So, but hey, it's nice. It's bonfire weather again. Yeah. So I'm going to start having some outdoor fires.
Something that I've been getting into on my own time is this philosophy that sort of speaks to the positive and negative of a thing, making it true and being able to recognize those things out of a situation. I think you do that really well. Naming the good, naming what sucks about the good. And
I'm trying.
We are.
Yeah.
But nothing but good when I think about all of you listening. Thank you so much for returning to Opus 94 of the TRILLOQUY podcast. Returning listeners, thank you. Huge ups to y'all for your continued support. To new listeners, thank you for checking us out. This podcast is one hosted by two men, not only two men who don't hate women, but two men who have a lot of proximity to so-called classical music and even more proximity to the rest of the world. So we bring those two things together every week and see what happens.
You know, it is important to acknowledge every single day of Women's History Month, but we've never shied away from women's stories on this podcast ever.
No. But I think Women's History Month, it's, you know, Women's History Month, an opportunity for us to really focus in on the history that we don't always talk about. And we even got into a lot of it on during Black History Month, because, you know, Black History Month should center women as far as I'm concerned. So, so anyway, returning listeners and new listeners, thank you for checking us out. Continued support for the TRILLOQUY podcast come from the American Composers Forum announcing a job opening for Vice President of Development. This job, the salary range starts at $90,000. Scott, anytime someone asks me to shout out a job opening or post it, I tell them, look, is the salary at the top? Can we see the salary immediately? And that is something that the American Composers Forum hears when it comes to
It's always annoying when you see something you like and then it goes down to the salary range competitive.
Right.
Competitive to what?
So, I'm on the board. You know, folks who know me and have been listening know I'm on the board of the American Composers Forum. I am actually chair of the Equity Committee. I encourage everyone to, if you're interested in this and you have the skill set and the experience to be a vice president of development, to check it out. There are a lot of organizations out there, Scott, arts organizations saying things. I think ACF is one of the ones really trying to push and trying to do the right thing. Vanessa Rose, huge shout out to her, the CEO over there. If you don't know Vanessa and you would like to get to know her in any way, just sort of see what her vibes are, check out the overture to season 2 of TRILLOQUY over at TRILLOQUY.org. So huge shout out to everyone over at the American Composers Forum. Today's downbeat, Scott, comes from Stacey Abrams. All of the work that she did, and Georgia reacted, didn't they? Another part of the TRILLOQUY today.
Yes. Shocking how quickly that went through. Like in the cover of Night, they push all this legislation through in a handful of days.
I mean, how did you describe the canceling of the Dixie Chicks last week? You said toot sweet.
Toot sweet.
I mean, that's
immediate.
Ooh, but women's history, Stacey Abrams definitely did some of that. Didn't she?
And she's getting back to work now. So we, I guess the fight continues. Not help is on the way, but the fight continues.
Right.
Yeah,
right, absolutely.
She's still working, thank goodness.
Speaking of the fight continuing, today's guest for the third movement, it was my great honor to speak with Louise Toppin, soprano coloratura, music professor, and someone who has really been embedded in this work for years and years. One of the things we talk about, Scott, Dr. Toppin says that she's been in this work of just centering Black music for so long. This resurgence that we've been seeing makes it feel like she has started her career all over again. So, it was really my honor to hear from her. I can't wait to share that with y'all.
Cool.
We have some great music by women to go through today. Lots of other great conversation. So, let's go ahead and jump into this first movement. I want to get the first movement started, Scott, with maybe a quick natural, I'll call it, just highlighting something from last week. One of the artists you brought in was Adia Victoria. And we talk about so much music and get on our tangents. We always don't spend the time with every artist that
last
we really
week was
need
really full. Last week was a full week, too.
Well, I just want to say that I constantly go back through the TRILLOQUY Tracks playlist on Spotify and check out the tunes we've talked about. I returned to South Gotta Change many times. Sat with it in front of my keyboard. Incredible composition. So shout out and an extra highlight to Adia Victoria from last week. Some music that's come out since last week, at least a music video that has the people up in arms, is by the one and only Lil Nas X. I'm putting a sharp in front of Montero. So did this organically come in front of your eyes, or am I the one who's told this?
No, I saw you post something. It was the stripper pole to hell that did it for me. And I didn't know what you were talking about, so I felt like, okay, I need to get versed in what you're talking about.
What is he talking about?
Yeah. I went and I watched the video once. I can appreciate the artistic effort that went into it, and there was some really dazzling visual things. But I have to say that's not for me. I'm probably not going to be spending a lot of time with this track. It didn't have the Old Town Road vibe to me.
a slightly different aesthetic.
Right. So this may be an instance where I do have to spend some time with it and think about it to begin to appreciate it more fully. Like I said, no disrespect. He's obviously talented and he obviously has an artistic vision, but this isn't my track.
You talk about, it's hard to, I have yet to experience the song separate from the video. I need to just put my earbuds in and actually really break down the words and all of that.
Good point. I did it from the video as well.
For folks who don't know what we're talking about, Lil Nas X put out a video that has the Christians upset. You mentioned, but I'm going to read a little bit of this article I have pulled up, but you mentioned you appreciated the artistic value of it. One of the things that I guess the thing that I appreciated most about the video was in the beginning, the depiction of the Garden of Eden and his introduction to sexuality as this evil thing, the serpent in the garden.
Yeah.
And I think that is the experience for so many queer people, and maybe even people who aren't queer, that first sort of experience that really shouldn't be bad feeling like something dirty or something you shouldn't be.
You're probably right.
I appreciated Lil Nas X depicting that there. I'm reading here from Variety.com. The name of the article is Lil Nas X claps back at critics of Montero video. It says, following the release of his red hot music video for Montero, Call Me By Your Name, Lil Nas X isn't holding back when it comes to responding to haters on Twitter. The video, which dropped on March 25th and is already trending #1 on YouTube, features the Old Town Road singer pole dancing into hell and giving the devil a lap dance, which has caused backlash from conservative groups.
I don't get that part. Why? If he went up and was doing it on God or Goddess, wouldn't that have been something to upset?
That they really would have been mad if Lil Nas X was giving a lap dance to the Son of God.
See, it seems right. See, it seems to me that if he goes down into hell and gives the devil a lap dance,
y'all call devil
they would be
gays
saying,
devils anyway.
They would be saying, see what they're probably worried about minors watching it and getting indoctrinated. Isn't that their word? Indoctrination.
And as Nicki Minaj, shout out to Nicki Minaj for the third week in a row, Lil Nas X is one of her stands, is a barb. So all of the fantastical elements and the outrageousness of it all, you can see Nicki Minaj's influence there. She was on The View one time and famously said,
I'm not showing skin because of 5 and 6 year olds, because 5 and 6 year olds have to be parented by their parents.
And I agree. We have to stop acting like these celebrities, these artists doing their thing, need to be centering your child and what parental controls you aren't putting on the remote control or whatever, if you really care that much about it. One thing that I think is important to note about this conversation is that so-called devil music or proximity to the occult through music is nothing new at all. We can go all the way back into the European classical. This podcast is called TRILLOQUY, so of course I'm just familiar with trill music, as it were, in classical music. And a piece of music that I always think about is I think it's Giuseppe Tartini. Last name is definitely Tartini.
Oh, the Devil's Trill.
Devil's Trill Sonata. Story I always tell. I'm an undergraduate. I'm listening to the public radio station there. Shout out to WKNO FM. And I pull up in the driveway and I'm hearing the end of this violin sonata that just sounds really dope. And I sit there. I'm late to class because I'm waiting for the announcer, shout out to Khaki Walton, to come on and say what this was. And that's when I first learned Giuseppe Tartini's Devil's Trill Sonata. You think they were outside back then in the 1700s picketing because he wrote this piece of music about a dream about the devil?
Probably.
You think they were mad?
Well, that's probably what got him bent out of shape. Think about Niccolò Paganini, who cultivated that look purposefully. The gaunt, dressed all in black, dour expressions all the time. He wanted people to think that, that he was possessed, and he would roll his eyes back in his head when he played. All that.
These folks were something else, wasn't they?
Yeah. You have Faust.
Yeah, Damnation of Faust. The first piece of music that I heard live. So I have memories there. Soldier's Tale.
Right.
If you play one of the Soldier's Tale instruments, bassoon, violin, clarinet, trombone, trumpet, percussion. I think I'm forgetting about somebody, but anyway, that's a piece of music by Stravinsky where the devil wins.
Yeah.
But anyway, fast forwarding to more contemporary music. Are there examples that you can think of music involving the devil or Satan that have folks in an uproar? Over dinner, we were talking about.
Yeah, it was right around 1980, 1982. A friend of mine in the neighborhood found an interview on a cassette tape with this guy who was talking about backward masking.
Oh, right.
And if you don't know what backward masking is, and you don't mind messing with your
the needle
on your record player, try playing a vocal section backwards. Go counterclockwise and see if you can hear words. this guy had spent the time to listen to certain rock albums, and when he played them backwards, he heard all of what he considered the devil worship or calls to suicide. The Eagles in Hotel California faced it. Styx, the band Styx. There was Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath, Ozzy Osbourne. There's loads of people who have been accused of being devil worshippers, or the band Kiss. They said, "Oh, that stands for Knights in Satan's Service."
Oh, okay.
That's what. It's all bollocks, right? But a friend of mine in the neighborhood hears this interview, gets freaked out because he has some of these albums. And he goes and gets some gas and some gunpowder from his father's hunting room.
And y'all are children.
Yeah,
Go on.
yeah. And we went in the backyard and we lit up a bunch of LPs. They were all his. It didn't bother me at all. I was like, yeah, pour more gas on there. That's cool.
So did you go back and backtrack some of your records to see if you could hear anything? Did you ever try it?
No, I never did. I didn't have any of the albums that the guy was citing. And I had so few records at that time.
You didn't want to
You would have
them
to
up.
fight me to get one of them. Yeah.
Well, anyway, shout out to Lil Nas X. As you say, Scott, it's not your jam. I don't know how many more times I will watch the video myself, but I love the freedom of it. I am excited that there is a young black queer artist out here with the freedom to make all of these people mad, just for being. It's cool. I love to see it. We love to see it. Tying all of this concept with women's history, we were talking about Sinead O'Connor a little bit, and I do think that this is an important and significant bit of women's history to sort of highlight at the intersection of music and all of that. How about you refresh us as to what had happened?
In 1992, Sinead O'Connor was the musical guest on Saturday Night Live. She did an a cappella version of Success Has Made a Failure of Our Home, and afterward, and I think the second set, she did an a cappella version of War, and held up a photo of Pope John Paul II and ripped it in half and threw it up in the air, and she was trying to draw attention to all of the instances of sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. And she's saying, we need to be going after the leaders that are, perpetuating these things. And she was about like the Dixie Chicks. She was blacklisted for a long time.
They were mad at her.
And the very next week they had Joe Pesci on, and they held up a taped together version of the photo, that had been all taped together. Uproarious applause. He said that if he was the guest when she did that, he would have smacked her. All of this is online. You can find all of it.
Well, I think in retrospect, Sinead O'Connor won the war. Here's a little bit of that tune, Success Has Made a Failure of Our Home.
We used to go out walking hand in hand. You told me all the big things you had planned. It wasn't long till all your dreams came true. Success put me in second place with you.
Just as the conversation of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church continues, so does the saga between Daniel Bernard Romain and the Tulsa Opera.
Oh, you've got an update, huh?
The story is still sort of out there. We haven't gotten a lot more information, but more and more people are certainly talking about it, and more avenues are picking it up. I'm reading a little bit here from Vulture. I'm going to post this article in the description of this, because as we were talking about last week, the thing that Tulsa Opera did that so many of us have an issue with is positioning one of their black singers, Denise Graves, in opposition to Daniel Bernard Romain, creating this him versus her situation instead of Daniel Bernard Romain against the opera company. I think this article from Vulture by
Justin Curto,
the screen is far away from me, really does a great job of making the point that it was the opera that did this. The other thing that this article does that I think is very important is kind of affirm in a very shady way that not all skin folk is kinfolk. It says here, Tobias Picker, the artistic director, tells Vulture it is shocking that Remain saw a racial dynamic in the interaction. Quote, I wasn't stifling his voice. I was giving him a note, he says. Howard Watkins, who is black and a co-curator, says he asked Picker to curate the program with him and tells Vulture it didn't even occur to us that this would be interpreted as a race issue. He calls it reverse racist and a bit offensive, actually, for Remain to call out Picker, given that Picker is curating an event that uplifts black composers. You see how ghetto classical music is?
Well,
reverse racism. You have people in positions of power, and Scott, this is a conversation that I do think is uncomfortable in certain spaces, in mixed spaces, because I don't like using my platform to talk against black people, to be anti-black.
No.
We have here an example of a black person in a position of power helping the structure go along. I'm challenged. What is your reaction to the implication, the allegation of Daniel being reverse racist for implying that race is an issue in a concert dealing with the Tulsa race riots?
Well, I guess that I can quote him and say, reverse racism would not have occurred to me. But I also have to question. I wasn't stifling his voice. I was giving him a note. Mm-hmm. But didn't it come out? Didn't the story say we're not going to perform this piece and you will still get your full commission price? Mm-hmm. So how did that? How is that a note?
I think it's also
it's a goodbye note.
It's also important to note that this article states that they tried to get someone else to sing the lyric.
Did they?
Goddamn America, but they couldn't find anyone. Scott, like I said and I named women's names. Mm-hmm. You know, I have talked to many opera singers that would love the opportunity, but we're getting to the point to where the people, the populace, the folks on the ground, we know the difference between a prepared statement and, you know, what's really going down. The evidence is there, and it's really pitiful. So anyway, that saga continues. We'll see if it continues to continue.
And did you put a flat by that, or did you?
Oh yeah. Actually, I put a natural here because I want to applaud Vulture for for pointing out, making it clear what happened as far as the sort of positioning of Denise Graves against DBR. So shout out to y'all over there. I found a performance by Denise Graves. We've been saying her name a lot, so I figured we should hear from her. Incredible singer who has really been historic in many ways, despite many people's challenges with her decision to not sing the written lyrics of this piece of music by Daniel Bernard Remain. Anyway, I found a tune of hers called Scandalize My Name. Fully appropriate for the moment, right? Here's a little bit of that.
Scandalize my name. Woo! You know he scandalized my name. He scandalized my name. He scandalized my name, y'all.
All right, Scott, rounding out this week's accidentals with a sharp, something that I think maybe is some good news, some light at the end of a very, very long tunnel. Probably not long enough. You said
something there.
This is coming from minpost.com. Title of the article, When Can the Arts Reopen? Dr. Fauci says, if we are careful, sometime in the fall. Here's a little bit from it. With vaccinations rising, COVID-19 deaths falling, venues still shuttered, and many artists out of work for more than a year, arts organizations want to know, how soon can we reopen? How fully? With what practices in place? In January, the National Endowment for the Arts released a report, The Art of Reopening, a guide to current practices among arts organizations during COVID-19. On Tuesday afternoon, March 23rd, they followed up with a webinar, The Art of Reopening, a virtual conversation of community engaging arts audiences in physical spaces. 7,000 people attended. I'll have that posted in the description for y'all to read. But long story short, we need to continue to be physically distanced as much as possible, vigilant, wearing our damn mask for fuck's sake. Somebody came over. So I'll put my tea out. Somebody came over here the day the maintenance man came to the door talking about, oh, I forgot my mask. Well, you can't just forget your mask. That is something that you need, okay? Let me not get into my feelings, but anyway, Dr. Fauci said that hopefully by fall we can go see Beethoven, I guess. What do you think? Do you think that's hopeful, or do you think that's realistic? A September where all of the orchestras, all of the folks have their doors back open?
I think it's hopeful.
Yeah.
I really do think it's hopeful, because if you look at the way things are spiking again and how they had a 3-person panel, the woman that normally reports with Dr. Fauci every day, she used the words impending doom. She's nervous about, and I'm sorry that I've forgotten her name, but she's nervous about a 4th wave. And on my end of town, the amount of people going maskless, it's like they've already been vaccinated and we have herd immunity. People are just tired of it, I guess. And I don't know. I think it's optimistic that we're going to be back in the fall.
Yeah, that's Rochelle Walensky. I'll post that article too, because I didn't see her saying that that we're all doomed.
Not just saying there's impending doom, trying to hold back tears, as she said this, visibly shaken, according to the report.
Ooh, well.
So I don't know. It seems like people are getting a little cavalier a little too soon.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that the last place that you want to stop running is the last 100 yards of the marathon.
Exactly. Well, let's say that by some miracle vaccinations go through and we are back in September. We've had a lot of Zoom panels, so I guess the concert halls are just going to be filled with diversity, right? It all worked. We did it. What tells you that that's not going to be the case?
Because we have stories like this in the headlines. Because we have stories like Tulsa and the Met in the headlines. Still. So, yeah, I think that it is still going, you keep bringing back 10 to 15 years. And there might have been some hyperbole way back in my announcement after your termination. But I don't know if there's a lot. I don't know.
I'll take my hat off, because the way it's looking, it's so hard not to want to give up. I tell you, every other day I go see how much they pay to work at McDonald's in the Bahamas. So somebody needs a Big Mac.
Try Starbucks first,
and that's the food of my culture. So yeah, so I'll probably be a manager. Listen.
Oh, that's bad.
Listen. What do you want? What's going to get you in any sort of crowd? What sort of concert who has to come through town for you to say, okay, I'm going in September?
I really miss this series that I used to go to called the Real Phonic Radio Hour, and it was roots and folk and things like that. I saw some amazing bands come through, but the thing about that was it was limited. There was maybe 200 people.
Yeah.
And so there was space. The volume was at a spot where, you could hear everything well, but you could still turn to your buddy and say, man, that was amazing. I miss that. But in order to get me to go out, it's going to have to be a spectacle.
Yeah.
I'm going to quote Devon Gray from Opus 12. It's going to have to be a spectacle. There's going to have to be a music component, a dance component, the design and art component. It's going to have to be so many different things coming together to lure me out. It's going to have to be a spectacle.
Like I said a couple weeks ago, when we were talking about the Grammys, that Cardi B performance with the LED screens and I need that.
Something like, yeah, sure.
I need that. Beethoven 4 is not going to do it.
I need ballet dancers and pole dancers. I want a line dance in between and all that. And in grand attire.
Of course, there's a little bit of hyperbole. I don't if the Minnesota Orchestra or somebody had I don't know, William Grant Still won on a program. Maybe if maybe like even that from an academic standpoint, I feel like the arts institutions have to work for my ticket. And more of us need to have that attitude.
Let's build a ticket. Let's put DBR's piece on there with "Goddamn America" in the lyric. Let's put that. What? How would you fill out that program if you put DBR's piece on? And I'm sorry, I only know him as DBR. The composer's full name is
Daniel Bernard Romain.
Okay,
yeah, but I think DBR is fine.
Okay, so let's take his piece. We'll call that the anchor. Okay, so how are you going to fill out the program?
Okay, so we have "Goddamn America." I would invite Joel Thompson, but a piece that is not Seven Last Words of the Unarmed.
Okay.
We do that. And I would love for there to be a big orchestral transcription of something that, got us through the pandemic. One of these big pop songs. I mean, I don't know, maybe Old Town Road or some Megan Thee Stallion or Beyonce, something like that can
a spectacle
can get us there. We do those things. The concert is about 40 minutes. We're not there all night, and we're good to go.
Fair. Yeah, I think a time limit is good too.
Yeah.
And plus, I'm over 50, so can we start around 6?
When you think about concerts in the before Ford time, is there a concert, specifically one that featured a woman, as we're centering women's history, your own women's history, I suppose, in your live concert experience?
One lit up right away. I saw Tracy Chapman at Sandstone Amphitheater in Kansas City in the late 90s. I don't know the exact year, but it had rained all day the day before and had dried up just enough so that everybody could sit down. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those magic sunsets, very calm, and Tracy is up there singing sounding exactly like she did on her albums. She's amazing.
I know I gave Miss Tracy Chapman a hard time a few weeks back when there was some drama with Nicki Minaj and sampling and stuff. Mm-hmm. Like I said then, I'll repeat it now. Nicki is a legend that we need to repeat. There's no that we need to honor. There is no denying that Tracy Chapman is a legend, bringing a complete aesthetic to Black folks that we wouldn't have got any other way. The type of music that she was creating, because she was Black, that was palatable to people in my circle, and that's how we know her name. I mean, give me one reason. Just the guitar playing, I can see how that could be a great sample for a rap song, because that music is so incredible. But of course, there are many others.
I heard her right from the beginning with Fast Car. So so I've been there since the beginning.
She did a cover, and I found this back in the Napster or even Kazaa days. You remember Kazaa?
I do.
It tore up everybody's computer.
Yep.
A Tracy Chapman doing a cover of Wonderwall, and I haven't found it. I maybe it just doesn't exist anymore, or Tracy Chapman has it locked in the vault.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that.
So much great stuff. But the piece of music in particular that you would like to highlight here as we transition into the second movement is what?
It's called "Baby Can I Hold You," and when she performed this live, the natural daylight was almost gone. The lights for the rest of the show were just starting to fire up, and it was just a magic spiritual moment.
Sorry is all that you can say. Years gone by and still words don't come easily. Like sorry.
Beautiful imagery and beautiful music, Scott, to get us into this second movement where we strike a chord, talk about the music that moved us. We will not and could not get through Women's History Month without me leaving a little bit of room in the second movement to honor Beyonce.
I thought you were going to give the whole second movement to her.
We're equitable here on the TRILLOQUY podcast, but everyone knows how much I love Beyonce. in the announcements, I talked about a job opening at the American Composers Forum. Last week, TRILLOQUY had the opportunity to sponsor in part a talk between myself and Jessica Majunkins, Lady Jess, a TRILLOQUY season 1 guest, a TRILLOQUY alum, just talking about some of that and really breaking down Beyonce's Homecoming as a work of art, as a representation of what an orchestra could look like. She described that ensemble as a black orchestra. And in acknowledging the fact that there are all sorts of types of orchestras around the world, when we talk about gamelan orchestras and, maybe even a ukulele orchestra. I mean, just we can't chain that word orchestra to one aesthetic. And I think Beyonce's Homecoming is a great example of that bit of the conversation. You talked about how much you enjoyed the live performance that you heard of Tracy Chapman. Have you found that you typically prefer live or a studio version of a song that you love by one of your favorite artists? Do you usually gravitate to one or the other?
That depends, because typically when I really fall in love with a piece, the first recording that I hear it becomes the benchmark. You know what I mean? So the first time you fall in love with something, you want to go back to that
That's
sound.
a good point, yeah.
To that sound every time. And I have heard some live versions of studio tracks that I love, that the live version I go, you ruined it. But sometimes if I'm sitting there in the audience and I hear a kick-ass live version, then I'm like, oh man, that burned the house down.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it really depends which one you fall in love with first.
Yeah.
But I do typically gravitate to the studio versions.
I do too, but when you say that it's the one you heard first, I think that's a good point, because usually that is what we hear first. So obviously I hear the studio versions of all of Beyonce's tunes first. The song I wanted to highlight, I don't think I've highlighted it on a TRILLOQUY before. There's so many tunes that I could really do a breakdown of, but on Beyonce's album 4, an album that I think people in general sort of overlook, there's a tune called I Care. It's one of those slow, break up, going through my feelings songs that, a lot of people, I think, at that time really wrote off. Well, Beyonce, for her Homecoming performance, really did a great feature of that song, I Care. It brought it back to life for me, and the arrangement for, again, what she described as her black orchestra in that setting with the live vocals, that tune has quickly become my favorite Beyonce moment. It's hard for me to name a favorite Beyonce composition, but that is for sure my favorite Beyonce moment. I think that there are so many aspects of it that speak to so-called classical training and classical technique. There's an incredible guitar solo in the song that Beyonce sings on top of, depicting those moments when you really are just breaking down. Not many artists can musically depict the I'm on my floor crying tears and turning that into music. Well, Beyonce did that with this tune. I am moved every time I hear it when I'm feeling away, even Scott, about the business of TRILLOQUY. Back in the days when we would bump heads a little bit, I would come on and listen to the song and just that's my way of processing. Incredible composition. I want to share a little bit of the opening of it here because I think it's really strong. Here's a little bit of I Care by Beyonce from Homecoming.
Told you how you hurt me, baby, but you don't get. Now I'm crying and deserted, baby, but you don't care. Ain't nobody tell me this is love when you're immune to all my pain. I need you to tell me this is love. You still don't care, but that's okay.
You know that I said my favorite Beyonce track was Formation. It's upgraded since new releases have come out, and what is it, Black is King, when that album came out. The track that she did with Kendrick Lamar, Nile,
Oh, yeah.
that's pretty good. And I also like the one right after Brown Skin Girl, already. That's with Major Lazer.
Yeah, there are a lot of artists there from the motherland. So, Beyonce, what can be said? What can be said? Let me ask you this before we move on from Beyonce.
Oh, here we go.
You at 50, nearly 51 years old, you were there for a lot of the legends. You were there for Patti LaBelle. You were there for Gladys Knight, Madonna. You know, all of these. I'm sure you can name many
Tina
others.
Turner.
Yeah, a legend among legends.
Roberta Flack.
Having been there for those women, do you think Beyonce will be included in that
so.
museum exhibit, in that chapter of the encyclopedia?
I think so. Yeah, without question. It's a different sort of royalty, isn't it? Mm-hmm. That she has. But we wouldn't have a Beyonce if it wasn't for the likes of Tina Turner and Gladys Knight, you know, some of the women that laid the foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want everyone to think of your contemporary favorite. You know, we can talk about all the phenomenal women of days past, but someone who is out making music today. You too, Scott, your favorite woman in music. All right, does everyone have her in mind? Okay. She could never against Beyonce. Go on. What music do you have for us, Scott?
I wanted to. I don't know if it's going to compare now since it's been set up against Beyonce, but we talked 2 opuses ago about the idea of an extended technique when we were talking about slide guitar.
Right, yes, so-called extended technique.
Right, and I like somebody said on your timeline, or as I like to call them, techniques. Uh-huh. I thought, ooh, touche, good point. The incorporation of electronics is happening more and in really interesting ways, and I wanted to highlight 2 women that I really enjoyed what they were doing with a cello and a few pedals. First, Julia Kent, who, you know, there's a tendency to want to put a label on some music. So I'm going to say this is like a neo-impressionist piece.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, because she's using her cello with a delay pedal. So she's getting this really interesting echo sort of effect. I don't know how she's getting the little bell sound in there, but you can tell that she's using a delay and a loop pedal, and she can build a song in the moment, like lay down a backing track and then solo over the top. Right? It's really interesting. And it's so dreamy. And when I was listening to this, we had a really windy day a couple weeks ago, and I know how you feel about using music to relax or unwind. But you have to admit that there are some times when a certain piece of music is so complementary to an experience. So I'm on my porch, I'm having a little smoke, having a little beer, and the wind is blowing the leaves in such a way that the music was spot on. It was so good. The other one, also a cellist and using some electronics, Zoë Keating. You probably know that name. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to classify, I would have to put this one more in neoclassical, you know, whereas the neo-impressionist stuff from Julia, you know, you might struggle to find the one or exactly what count she's following. Right. But this track by, I should say, that track by Julia Kent was called Through the Window.
Yes.
This one by Zoë Keating is called Sun Will Set. And you can hear her building this one on the fly. I played a little bit of that for you. What sort of a box would you put that in if you had to?
I would if I had to like go into that sort of categorization of that music, I would say contemporary classical.
Okay.
I think that's where it belongs.
But working on the idea of extended techniques or techniques, and being able to record a track on your own, go and set up somewhere on a street corner or in a cafe somewhere and be a whole band with just some electronics. I mean, I think that's on the it's not on the horizon. It's here. You know, we have people that are really doing some interesting things with it. Perhaps something along the lines of like the Phoenix and
Ilharmonic.
The Ilharmonic.
Yeah, of course.
You know, so I think that maybe that will get more people out once orchestras start playing again. Let's hear some new sounds. Let's hear some interesting sounds. Let's go ahead and put a DJ in the middle of the orchestra, see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, I'm glad you mentioned DJ. That's actually a great transition as we get ready to get into this third movement. One of the things that I talk with Dr. Louise Toppin about is the evolution of Black music. I think I mentioned Megan Thee Stallion and Cardi B during our conversation, and not only did she say, you know, affirm that it's important to know something about the evolution of Black music as it applies to today's music and being, familiar with today's artists. Something that she said that I found really interesting was that she's looking forward and hopes to get to see what comes next. Can you imagine what's after hip hop? You know, considering how, you know, the Negro Spirituals went from, you know, blues to gospel to jazz, R&B, you know, so we have all of those steps along the way. The next one is going to be wild. That's going to be something else.
What's after Montero? What's after Lil Nas X? What's the next evolution?
Right. I'll have some more information on Dr. Louise Toppin in the description. She's a soprano coloratura opera singer. She has been embedded in Blackness and the intersection of race and classical music all of her life. We actually start the interview by she talks about some of her upbringing. Her father was integral in turning Black History Week into Black History Month. So much history there. I'm really excited and honored to be able to present Dr. Louise Toppin to you. One of the other things that she does, she heads a nonprofit called Vademus, and among the many things that they do in supporting and promoting Black classical music, they do a lot of recordings. And there's a piece by William Grant Still that I heard for the first time thanks to one of those Vademus recordings. It's one called Inanga. It speaks to a West African sort of harp instrument and incorporates all of those aesthetics. As we transition into my conversation with Dr. Louise Toppin, I wanted to share a little bit of that recording and honor, once again, as we continue to honor Women's History Month, the woman who I first heard playing this harp feature called Inanga, Ann Hobson Pilot, a historic Black musician, one of the first musicians across the country to receive tenure positions in American orchestras. She started with the National Philharmonic, a historic woman who I hope everyone will look up and learn more about. I'll have some information on her in the description. But in the meantime, here's my conversation with Dr. Louise Toppin. Here's a little bit of William Grant Still's Inanga to get us there.
My elementary experience was on the campus of Virginia State. They actually had a laboratory school.
Wow.
And it's just at the end. My brother and my cousins integrated the high school I eventually went to because I'm 7 years younger than they are. But that tells you how close some of the issues were for us. But it does mean that I did go to an integrated high school. My parents were honored at the White House because of my dad. So he navigated spaces that allowed me, even though he was the president of the ASALH, that's the society that led the legislation, but he also was on the American Historical Society. So he worked in an integrated society and had us go along with him. His youngest daughter, his youngest child. So of all the children, I lived the most in an integrated society. And so he had taught us that there are two histories, but they are really one. Mm-hmm. And so when I went to University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, I was a pre-med major. And I also took music, and I was the only Black student over there in the music department. And so it was unusual to me because I'd gone to a Black Episcopal church growing up. So my world was primarily African Americans, but they took us to the symphony and to other spaces that we were the only Black people. Mm-hmm. We went to the opera, we went to the symphony, we went to a lot of things. So I think that because of that, my parents making a conscious effort to make sure that we knew how to navigate the world at a high level because he was. Mm-hmm. I think that was what made it, possible at UNC. I will say that the UNC did a great job. They had a dean, I can't remember what his title was, but all the Black students, he called us together first day of school. We were all sitting in an auditorium together, the entering class. So, they were trying to connect us from the beginning. They had a peer advisory program that if you were doing well in your courses, you were hired to tutor other students. And so I remember being a junior, and my assignment was to tutor athletes. And I went to school at the time that Michael Jordan was there. So I went to the athletic dorm, and I saw Michael Jordan was there, Sam Perkins, James Worthy. They were all in the same class, or the same era of time that I was there. That's not who I was tutoring. I was tutoring football players. Uh-huh. But that's how much of a responsibility that they'd already set up this system on campus long before I got there. So I made it work, and I sought out those who thought like me and those who I could work with.
So what's been your response to this sort of I hate to call it a renaissance, but this so-called renaissance of Black composers and just Blackness in general? I mean, even in my lifetime, I've seen Black people move into a more pro-Black sort of thinking than I've always seen. What's been your response to that?
I've actually said to people, it is amazing. I've been doing this work for more than 30 years, and yet I feel like I just started my career because there is so much. And I've lived long enough that I saw the Renaissance in the 70s coming out of the Civil Rights era, where Black students were pushing universities, white institutions, to add Black history perspectives on courses. And of course, my dad, being at Virginia State, he was part of that and helped with the African American Studies course at Virginia Commonwealth, the white institution that was only 30 miles away from us. So he taught at two universities later on in his career because they wanted him that much. So I saw that. And so it's shocking to me I've spent my career as a performer, and to get a call from the Kennedy Center asking me about a Black composer when I've sung at the Kennedy Center as a singer, and they're now calling me about, can you help us? It's just absolutely, I'm still flabbergasted that this is what this year is, but I'm also gratified and hoping that we take advantage of the fact that we've had this resurgence and that we don't let it become a one-time resurgence as has happened before. I mean, it's not like this hasn't happened before,
right?
But it's happening with a different intensity that I hope is a sustainable intensity.
The deeper I get into this work, the more I'm seeing corners of the arts field specifically that I didn't always have that much knowledge or experience with. Despite having made a living as an orchestral bassoonist for a decade, when I've started to talk with opera singers and opera professionals, there are just so many norms and so many names that are new to me, much less the Black person who has never had a professional connection to classical music. What hope do we have of getting Black stories on these stages and getting them performed in an authentic way when the lack of a Black audience seems to be the bigger challenge?
Yeah. Well, I think that you've hit it on the head. That it's a catch-22. If you're not telling Black narratives, why would Black audiences, except for maybe those who have studied in the academy and are already trained in music and appreciate Mozart and everybody else, why is a new audience going to come to the concert hall? If you're trying to affect the masses and bring them into the concert hall, you're not telling their stories. So, I mean, Porgy and Bess, as much as the world loves it, and it is a great employer for Black people, it is not a story that is uplifting or positive from the Black community. Mm-hmm. And I've had the opportunity to sing both Clara and Bess and spend a lot of time with that story. So I know the power of it, but you're talking about drug dealers, someone is raped in the show. You're talking about a poor community, that doesn't have education. So that's a story that is not one that uplifts the Black community. Then you have Treemonisha, that was the century before, that is a young woman, an African-American woman, that is uplifting her whole society. And so that one is not received the same kind of sustained performances that Porgy and Bess has. The music's different. It's dated because it is dealing with ragtime music, so it is different. But it's interesting. That's been the closest early work with a Black story that the Black community might want to hear, something talking about uplifting education. My hope is that because of this reckoning, if you want to call it that, at this moment, that we are starting to get narratives. I mean, Margaret Garner was created a couple of years ago, which is the story of a Black slave woman. Again, it's not, she drowns her children. So it's not it's not a positive, uplifting kind of story, right. But we are starting to see some. And I think that with Anthony Davis telling the story of Central Park 5 and winning the Pulitzer for it this year, that I think that we do have an opportunity and that companies are now taking it seriously. Because as you know, as an orchestra musician, orchestras and operas have been the last two bastions to not really embrace stories other than the ones that will drive the ticket sales in their opinion. Right. And yet Porgy and Bess has been the opera that's been used whenever ticket sales were needed. So it's kind of interesting. Black people come for that one particular opera, but we don't try other operas in order to engage that same community. It would mean more work as well. Right, that you have to go and do PR, right? In the community, you'd have to go take the players out to the community and the singers and actually talk to them to entice people to come. You'd have to do a media blitz like they did do with Margaret Garner, that really brought in people out of curiosity. So I think we have that opportunity. It's how is it taken on? We also have the issue that with opera companies, you only have two artistic directors at the highest level. You've got Wayne Brown at MOT, and you have Afton Battle at Fort Worth. I was trying to think of which one in Texas. Exactly. So those are the only two leaders, and without an administrator or administrative team that's interested, how do you bring these stories forward? Yeah. And for me, bigger than getting Black folks into the opera house to expose them to the, so-called beauties and brilliance of opera, there are stories there that we as a people can benefit from knowing. Right. One of the most upsetting things to me, when I think back on my upbringing and my education, is having never been told the story of Tulsa and Black Wall Street. That was something I learned as a completely grown adult. I wasn't no kind of student when I first learned that. I'm sure that you've heard about, some of the drama that's happening in the opera world in Tulsa and having that narrative put out on the stage. It's a very, I see it as a very sticky situation, a very yes and situation. What are your reactions to Tulsa not allowing this story, in essence, to be told to more people? Well, and it's a nuanced and sticky situation. As you said, I know the two people who are at the center of this on either side, Howard Watkins and Daniel Romaine, were both colleagues of mine at Michigan. We all did our degrees together. So we've got two different perspectives. And also, I know and respect Denise Graves for her work. And so why I say it's nuanced, I wish that before it went into the media, and we don't know what all the correspondence is, but it seems like it should have been a conversation between Daniel Romaine and Denise Graves about the text, because the text that is the problematic line is a text that has been used by Nina Simone in a song.
Exactly.
Kendrick Lamar, who won a Pulitzer for music. We have the words, but also as an artist, I know that there is sometimes that difficulty if you don't want to sing a certain text or line for religious reasons or something. But since it was a commission specifically for that person, it just seems to me that on the nuanced end, why did that not happen? What is unfortunate is because of the way it is pulled, now it has another look and perception. I actually brought this to my African-American art song class this morning. We just happened to have it, and some were saying this is bringing back those same old stereotypes of silencing a story. And you're right that this is an important story of Tulsa in 1921, that the audience certainly needs to hear it. But did it have to happen this way? Was it really, it's a control issue that you've given a commission, you've said use whatever text you want, but then you criticize the text or one word within a text and pull the entire commission. So there's problems, but of course, I don't know the full story, wasn't on the email thread, but I think what one of my students did say is, well, by doing this, now I really want to see the piece. So in essence, there are going to be people who want to hear this piece now because of it. So it's going to be interesting to see what's the next piece of this. But I feel sorry for all three parties who are put into an awkward situation, and they all think they're right.
Yeah.
That's always hard.
One of the things that I learned, again, my blind spots in opera, I didn't know that singers, that performers really pulled that kind of weight within opera houses, which, is encouraging for me to understand on one side. On the other side, I think about the potential dangers of, a singer not wanting to sing something. And I'm not speaking specifically to Miss Graves as much as I'm speaking to the idea of, a white singer not wanting to, be a part of something that affirms Black folks. I mean, do you see potential dangers there? Do you have experience in that?
Well, sure. I do see it on all levels, but so it's kind of interesting. At one point, the singer really did, when opera started, the singer really did rule. Whatever the singer wanted happened. But then we actually came to a point where the singer did not exert control. Like the average singer would not be able to say, I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z. They would just be replaced. And that has happened many times. And yes, I have had experiences in which I knew of people who were fired for whatever. Now, when you're the star, though, on a certain a level where your name being linked to a project is what makes that project successful, then you have a whole nother conversation. I don't know that I'm answering you very well, but there are again nuances of how many times, I don't know how many times Denise Graves would have had an opportunity to say, I don't want to sing a line. But again, to me, it seems odd that there wasn't a compromise worked out, because the bigger picture and the bigger issue is this piece needs to be told, or a piece around this certainly needs to be told. I hate that the story's squelched.
Yeah.
Rather, I hate that it happened the way it unraveled, and that the story was going to be squelched, rather than let's figure something else out. But no, I've never had the kind of control where I could stop a project.
Have you found yourself in the position, you say you know have never been able to stop a project, but even so, have you found yourself in a situation where there was a lyric or a narrative that you didn't feel comfortable using your instrument to put forward?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the thing is with the commission, because I've done a world premiere of a whole bunch of works. The thing is, I've always had the opportunity to work with the composer. And so that's why the world would never know it, that I have had an opportunity where I've said, can we look at this? And the composers have said, fine, let's work on it. And we've worked on it together. So, you know, when you're doing a commission, that's part of the thing. If you're writing a commission for my voice specifically, then all the composers I've ever worked with wanted to have a conversation with me about it. I remember one composer wrote a piece that had something like 7 high E's, and I mean E6 for me. I have the notes, of course I could sing it, but it was like a 10-minute piece, and there were 6, 7 of those things. And I said, can we work this differently? If you want the text understood for clarity, can we work it differently? Or the text doesn't set well with this. Can we? Singers do that all the time. And that's why I said I'm sort of puzzled as to how it got to this level instead of really a private conversation, Denise Graves and Daniel Romaine behind closed doors working on the libretto. But yes, I have been in that situation many times where it wasn't singable.
Yeah.
without the nuances of this is how my instrument works. Let's work together. And every composer I've ever worked with, there's never been one that said, you have to sing it this way only. They listened and they said, okay. Or they said, I would prefer not. And I said, okay, we'll work on the way you have it. But it's a conversation.
Yeah, collaboration. It's all about.
Right. To me, that's what a commission that's for me is about. It's a collaboration.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm excited to not have to ask you is your experience with Black music, because you put it out there. Not only is that your brand, I think it's worth noting that it's even in your bio and the way people describe you. You know, you aren't talking about the brilliant roles that you've sung of Rossini and Mozart and all these people. You're really affirming the value of this Black music in every way. Is this a testament to what you were lucky enough to be exposed to? Is there some sort of intentionality behind it? Because again, so many of us, folks my age and younger, came up through our education not knowing half the names that, you celebrate in your work. How did that happen?
Well, as I was saying to you at the beginning, because I grew up with a father who talked about African-American history. That let me know that there were composers as well. And I grew up on the campus of Virginia State with Undine Smith Moore. I was there when she premiered some of her music. So other composers came through. I saw Black composers in action. So I had no doubt that they existed and they wrote wonderful quality music. Then, of course, I did my bachelor and 2 different masters. And it wasn't until I came to University of Michigan as a doctoral student that I actually had my first course in African-American music. And it was that history course with Raylinda Brown, who is known as a Florence Prize Scholar. That was eye-opening to me. And she was just from Yale. That was her first appointment as a young scholar. So she was just starting all her Florence Price work. But also having the legacy of Willis Patterson as the first African-American on Michigan's faculty who started that whole art song push in the modern era to really educate students to those. Between those 2 things, I did my dissertation on African-American music. And that I didn't know where it was going to take me. I was singing Mozart and Donizetti and everybody else, my opera like everybody else. But what was fascinating to me was very early on, when I was hired to do, say a recital at a university, I would say, what do you want me to sing? And they would say, oh, whatever you want. Well, don't tell me I can sing whatever I want, because I would do something like a first half of traditional music, but the second half would be all African-American music. And the longer I did that, the more the whole program became all African-American music. And I would insist that I not be hired just in February.
Yep.
I would do this throughout the year. And so I normalized it. So for me, for 30 some years, I've just sung programs of African American music in multiple languages. That was the other piece, is I wanted to make sure people knew that we are not a monolith, that we sing in all languages, all musical styles, that there is much depth and breadth to African American vocal repertoire. And so, yes, everything that I proudly put all of that on my bio. And, for me, this is, as I said, I feel like my career has started over again, but this is what I've been doing all of this time. It's just that I'm stepping into a different light in this present moment.
I'm thinking about a spiritual performed in French somewhere in French speaking West Africa. I mean, that is a lot. That is a lot for me to wrap my head around. In the same way that you affirm and put value on Black music, I love to affirm musical training as something that happens well before class, before college. I talk about my connections to the spiritual as far as the Black church. I wonder what your earliest memories are, or if you have an earliest memory of the spiritual. Do you remember learning a spiritual for the first time, or anything like that?
Well, yes. Well, I have a couple of ways to answer that. I grew up I said I grew up on the campus of Virginia State University, but I actually went to elementary school at Virginia State. And so the environment, because it was the faculty and staff, the children of the faculty and staff of Virginia State, it was an all African American environment. And so we would do things like learn songs, including spirituals, and every child had to learn Lift Every Voice and Sing, because every event on that campus, whether it was political, athletic, it didn't matter what it was going to be. We were going to sing the national anthem and all 3 verses of Lift Every Voice and Sing from memory. I also, my family my father was an Episcopalian, so we grew up in a Black Episcopal church, which right. Our family's from the West Indies, so it's going to be a mixture of high church in terms of Bach and Beethoven, but you're also going to have spirituals, and you might have a little Andre Crouch even slipped in there. So it was quite an eclectic group, and even our the chanting part, the psalms and things, the music was written by Black composers. So that the minister of music at our church was the university's organist. So he was bringing in all of that. So yes, we sang spirituals. Undine Moore set some spirituals for the children's choir. That was her church was across the street. And so our church choir and her church choir, the children's choir, were singing her works. And we were sort of her tests, that she would have us test out some of this music. So my recollection of spiritual, and then many of her works, like I was there for her Afro-American suite when it was premiered, and that's based on spirituals. So I was also hearing Nobody Knows the Trouble I See, the alternate tune I heard in her work for the first time. And I do remember that, asking, what's that tune? And my father said, that's Nobody Knows the Trouble I See. And I said, that doesn't sound like Nobody Knows the Trouble. He said, yeah, this is another tune of it. So that taught me, and he would always my parents would take any musical event as an opportunity to learn and to teach us something new.
Yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about those arrangements here in a second, but before we got there, before I ask you this, I have to say this sentence: the Negro spiritual does not need white validation. I just want to make sure that is clear. With that being said, having the story of folks like Dvorak does not hurt. Do you see that affirmation as consequential? He came here and affirmed, as he said, Negro melodies as the foundation to, an American school of music, but that is not what ended up happening. So, I mean, at least not to an extent. So is having that story of Dvorak an important one to spread? Was that a consequential statement on his part?
Oh, it's interesting you say that, because I do think that what I'm finding interesting in this moment, and as I teach about spirituals is spirituals have stayed with us through African American composers. The arrangements that Burley did, where it's really an exact arrangement of spirituals, that gave way to a new source material for the spirituals. And even composers like David Baker, he evokes a spiritual. There's a stretto moment in one of his pieces called Status Symbol. He's got da-da, da-da, da-da-da in the right hand of the piano. It's up at, E flat 6. So you wouldn't hear it unless you slowed it down. You realize that as the text is talking about the movement of Black men through and women through society, he chooses to put a spiritual in there. Or he actually later writes a piece, six compositions, original compositions, evoking spirituals, but they're not spirituals, but he uses spiritual titles. And so the presence of spirituals, and Adolphus Hailstork will embed a spiritual in a heartbeat in a piece, and you have to listen carefully, but you'll find the contour of a spiritual in there.
Yeah, it's a suite of spirituals.
Exactly. Well, yes. I mean, he has a direct suite, but I'm thinking like the song of Ruth and Mary that he wrote. I sang those, and I noticed the story of Ruth and Naomi in the Bible, entreat me not to leave thee. Then there's sometimes I feel like a motherless child is embedded in there. And I said, well, how brilliant is that? He's punctuating the fact of these two women who are leaving their homeland for another land, and what that loss would have felt like. So yes, it was Dvorak's work was important. Also, Samuel Coleridge Taylor, though, who came and encouraged Black composers to use the source material. So it wasn't just one person. And I always try to tell my students that there were several people from Europe who had to encourage the first generation of African-American composers to use the spirituals, because they didn't want to preserve music from enslavement.
Right.
And it's only later that this music has become foundational and still lives through African-American composers. And now there are many, I try to call them allies, who are writing pieces using spirituals. They love the folk music. My fight has been trying to get the singing community to recognize that these compositions deserve to be treated as art songs in the same way that they treat Copland's folk song arrangements as art songs. It's quite often that we'll have songs and spirituals.
Right.
Instead of spirituals are a part of the body of song. And I'm partially guilty because I founded a competition with George Shirley in which I did pull out spirituals and say, you're required to do a spiritual, but I didn't know how else to tell them that we're valuing and want young people to learn spirituals. But we do talk about it being as a part of a collective art song format.
Yeah, and I really appreciate how you, again, contextualize that music as the source material for so many of these orchestral works and chamber works. The challenge, I think, from my perspective anyway, comes in when we're talking about the actual voice and contemporary recreations vocally of this music. I'm sure you get this question all the time, but I have to ask it. How do we deal with the all-white choir singing the spiritual? I mean, where do you even begin having that conversation, the implications therein?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I'm still working. I'm still working on that. I teach a course in African-American art song, as I said, at Michigan. And it is one that the students are required to take. It is about to happen. So that means I will have students of all ethnicities. And I do right now. I currently have every ethnicity in there. And I talk about spirituals. We spend time, because how can I talk about African-American art song without talking about where it comes from? And they have to experience it. I need them to sing and understand that when they sing "Let Us Break Bread Together" in their church services, they are already singing spirituals, and that's okay. We're glad that they love and embrace those pieces, but that there's a different treatment for those that are in dialect. There's different what you have to study it and give it the same attention that you did your German lieder, your French, melody or chanson. You can't just pick it up and say, okay, this is folk music. I just need to do whatever with it. I try to teach them to give this music dignity and the context that it deserves. And so your answer about what do you do with the all-white choir? Well, part of me is, in order for this music to live, we do need everybody to embrace it, because we both know that if we rely on a very small segment to embrace African-American music, as we talk about the first day in my class, Black people are seen as the authority of this music, and they don't know it, so they don't want to deal with it initially in a class like that.
Right.
White people are feeling like they're afraid they're going to appropriate this music, so they don't want to sing it. So now who's singing it?
Mm-hmm.
It falls through a crack. And I said, that's why we have to take the care and the time to find out what is it that concerns us about singing this music. And the biggest concern we all have is that it's not treated well. It's not contextualized well. And so I would say that, yes, if your choir is going to sing, the all-white choir is going to sing it, I would hope that they would do coachings with someone, whoever that someone may be, who can appropriately help them with language, with style, with rhythm, understanding that there are performance practices that go with it. And there are enough people around who really have this knowledge that there's no reason not to bring in an expert. I mean, just like at schools, if they're doing something by a composer from, I don't know, Norway,
right,
they would bring in someone from Norway before our choir would do something. I bet you they would bring in someone to really work with them on the language and the performance, and that's what every school does. But somehow, sometimes when we get to spirituals, churches and schools don't necessarily take that same care.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what upsets us all, is that it's not being treated with the same care. You'll hear tempos that are way off the mark and making it sound frivolous instead of have the solemnity that these pieces had.
So you're saying that more times than not, they're singing it too fast.
The person that taught me to sing spirituals, I didn't say, was Sylvia Olden Lee. And she was a stickler. She was the first Black person at the Metropolitan Opera on the staff in the 40s, before Marian Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was just such a stickler for the speed of it, because she said, think about what you would have been doing with this music.
Yeah.
That yes, there were, dance after, at the camp meetings. Of course, there were fevered dances. And as people got the spirit, but there also, a lot of it is not that fast. So yes, my issue is that some of these, the text just becomes so happy, and I'm not saying that there's nothing, because there were jubilant pieces, of course, but it just feels like quite often they all just take off at a fevered pitch.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't seem to retain the character of what these pieces how they would have functioned. Because I also teach functionality is important to know. Coming from Africa, how were these pieces used? How was vocal music used in Africa, which then transcends into the first generation of the enslaved Africans and would continue down the line. So
you mentioned dialect in dialect. I'm thinking back to so again, I was always an instrumentalist, but my senior year of high school, I joined the show choir and did that thing. I needed a period to fill out, and it was in that class that I first learned the spiritual "Sooner will be done." Now, saying the phrase "Sooner will be done" isn't as much of a challenge when we're talking about in dialect as some of the other period. How can I say, like, period performance sort of vocabulary? I mean, I guess I don't even have the vocabulary to really explain what I mean. When you're talking about in dialect, are you talking about the show enough and I'm going do this and that sort of, that language?
Yeah. Knowing that GWINE is going to,
right,
in one, or the articles D das der den, that you're softening the language that deals with how did people speak And how did they use their tongues in their native tongue? So that you're finding a way. I'm going to the East, I'm going to the West, that you can speak it so it sounds natural instead of I'm going to the East, I'm going to the West, which is when that shows a person has not studied the language as a language. I work with my students on how to pronounce it so that you are paying doing due diligence to what was a whole new dialect. And how do you approach it? Because if you sing any of Paul Laurence Dunbar, which not only African Americans, but non-African Americans love setting Dunbar, and a lot of Dunbar's pieces are in dialect. So you still have to know James Weldon Johnson also wrote some pieces that are in dialect. So it not only is incumbent upon us to learn how to sing dialect well for spirituals. You can avoid it by not singing spirituals, but there's a larger body of work that would be ignored if one doesn't look at how to work with dialect.
Yeah, looking at the culture, the larger picture from which this music comes. Wow. As we begin to wrap up, I want to fast forward to 2021. I want to fast forward to now. We acknowledge, as we do and as so many composers have, the spiritual as Black folk music, even Black classical music, as many people, including Nina Simone, had affirmed. As the spiritual evolved into blues and gospel and R&B and the different things, right now we're at hip hop and rap. Is it fair to call it a classical music? I try to affirm that language, maybe even as today's Black folk music. Where do you mentioned Kendrick Lamar and those folks from your perspective, knowing what you know and having experienced what you have, where does hip hop sit on that timeline?
I mean, I call it concert music, first of all, instead of classical music, because I'm thinking music that is intended for a concert hall. But with what I do with African American music, they bring every movement that we've had, as you just said, jazz, blues, gospel, and hip hop. It's all in what we have today, because if that's the expression and the music that I was working with a composer not too long ago, and he said his two favorite styles, an African American, he said Renaissance music and hip hop. But that's not unusual. That's what you're hearing, young people. They're listening to hip hop and they're listening to, I was sort of surprised on the Renaissance end, to be honest with you. I was like, at least classicism, but because even I went, okay. But you could hear it clearly. His contrapuntal writing was taken from the Renaissance and the clarity of his vocal line. But you could hear sampling, because there was one piece I had to do and I felt like I was looping back and back and back. And I called him and I said, "Is this sampling?" And he said, "Exactly." He said, you nailed it. And I said, because that means we as performers have to also stay current. Does that mean I sit and listen to a lot of hip hop? No, it doesn't mean that I necessarily, but does it mean I stay current and listen to some? Of course, there are young people in my family, so nobody's immune. We all listen, but I listen with interest. I remember in the 80s being a doctoral student, late 80s and early 90s being a doctoral student at Michigan. And we were listening to what MTV coming up and what was happening in terms of this music. If you're a musician, I think that we always remain curious and we always affirm that there is value in any artistic expression. At least I do. Yeah. So that even if I'm not listening actively to it, I'm still interested in the evolution. And UNC, I actually created a course from Africa to hip hop, because what I tried to show as a thread is, just as you had African griots who told the story and talked while playing music underneath it on their instruments, such as a kora, you have these are modern day griots who are telling the same stories of their village, of their community over music. And the music underneath is reflective of the generations before. So they are pulling with them music throughout musical threads throughout our community. So to me, it is a continuum. I'm excited to see what's our next musical creation.
Yep.
I'm not saying get rid of where we are, but we are constantly evolving. And I think that when you look at African American music, the brilliance of the creativity that has come through and the innovations in each of these forms, we've been at the forefront of the musical innovations. Not that everybody else isn't contributing, but we have had a lot of these innovations. We've been the genesis of the music that we're hearing today and appreciating. So we got to
get Megan Thee Stallion or the Baby to bring us back to our roots and sample something with the Cora or something.
See, I know who that is. I actually know Megan Thee Stallion. So Saturday Night Live.
Yep. How can folks learn more about you and more about the work you're doing?
Well, I have a website, louisetoppin.com is my personal website, which needs to be updated. But my two that are really updated, the George Shirley competition.org. It's actually George Shirley vocalcompetition.org. And that is a competition that we do annually. I started it 10 years ago with George Shirley as a vision to be the first competition on all African American music. And we started with my $1,000, and we now give away $30,000 to students from age 18 to 32 in 3 divisions, and we have a composers division on top of it. And a lot of Black opera stars have given special prizes as a part of this. But we're more than a normal competition because we do classes, we do master classes and musical classes to teach people about the style and the context, how to talk about it, how to learn about this. So I'm very proud of that initiative. I've also done one called the African Diaspora Music Project.org. That's another website. And that one is providing repertoire resources so that people can go and search what's there in vocal repertoire. I started with my own 3,000 or 4,000 pieces, and we've now expanded into the orchestral world to try to help with what is available. We're doing publishing for both of these projects or prompting publishing, because we recognize we can tell you where music is, but if you don't have access to a score, that does us no good. So there's big pushes in my space, my mind space right now with all of that. And then lastly, my organization is videmus.org. Videmus is a nonprofit founded in '86, and it was one of the early organizations that the goal was to bring to light the work of women and African American and underrepresented composers. And we've done concerts for children, we do recordings, we've done scores. But our main focus with Videmus as the parent has been the George Shirley competition, because I'm also a professor at the University of Michigan and still singing professionally. So I have my hands. I'm a little bit busy, just a little bit. I have 5 minutes in my life, but it's been a delight to do this work. And as I said, to do it in a sustained way. I look at the students that I've trained that are now the next generation of scholars and performers. And, as you said about Tulsa, not only I noticed on the list of some of the other singers, some of my own former students are Taylor Raven was one of my students at UNC Chapel Hill, and I worked with Leah Hawkins in some classes at Morgan. So I know the next generation, and I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to see their names associated with African American music, because as a teacher, I was that teacher who gave everybody in my studio African American music. And as they researched, they found out it was a Black composer, not because I said, and here's your one Black composer. It was your 7 songs for this semester are blah, 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 blah. And embedded in there would be always at least one that was an African American. And they didn't. My students never learned that they thought that's how everybody did.
Right.
So, as I've talked to people around the country, I've said, you never know what one voice can do. Just as with what you're doing, one voice can make a big difference.
I found that in spaces where I'm talking about the spiritual, there is always at least one person who is beginning this journey, who has never heard of the concept of a spiritual. In your years of teaching, I'm sure you've seen some of that as well. For the person listening right now who has never heard a spiritual, or at least never actively thought about hearing a spiritual, as they're hearing it, where do you get them started? What is the spiritual that everyone needs to know as the foundation, as the starting point on this journey?
Ooh, that's such a hard question. That is a really hard one. The one that speaks to me, I mean, unfortunately, it's going to be one that I recorded, so that's not exactly right. But one that I end every concert is "Guide my feet while I run this race, for I don't want to run this race in vain." And to me, that speaks to what we should all be about, is not wasting our time and the effort, the energy, and the life that we have been given by not doing something that furthers life for others and makes life better for others. So that's a Jackie Hairston arrangement that I recorded on a CD called "I Love But a Day." And I've had so many people comment. I've sung that around the world. Certainly, he's got the whole world in his hand. Margaret Bonds has been one that speaks universally to people, and it should, especially in times like this. So that's the other one that I think everybody should know that. Daryl Taylor sings one. My friend Daryl Taylor sings one, "Lord, I'll Go." And it's just, that I'm a willing vessel to go where I am sent to work into the world. So for me, the ones that sort of speak to who we need to be, those are the ones that really speak to me and resonate with me. And I would say for somebody just delving into this work, yeah, go check out some of those that help to give you a mission. Go do something.
Scott, one of the things that is so fun for me, something that I'm beginning to see, is that as we as we continue to feature more and more people on TRILLOQUY, the lines of connections are really interesting. So Bill Doggett, who we featured during Black History Month, he's known Louise for years, and they were colleagues, and I'm just able to offer even more perspective on how long fought this effort is in centering Blackness in classical music, affirming things like the Negro Spiritual and other Black aesthetics as American classical music. It's really moving to just see us as a part of this continued struggle. I wanted to know, before we get into the TRILLOQUY, one of the things that Dr. Toppin and I talked about were these white choirs singing the Negro Spirituals, and how there really should be someone Black there teaching it properly, so that these choirs can spread it on to more people properly, and really giving some dignity and respect to this music, the same respect that we give to everything else. My question for you is this: in your line of work, when it comes to radio production and radio hosting and that sort of thing, do you think there's a situation that you can think of in which it would be beneficial to have that Black person in the room?
Most of them.
Okay.
Well, I mean, let's go back to the Tulsa opera example.
Mm-hmm.
Is Tobias Picker Black?
No.
Okay, and he said that this didn't occur to him that it would be a racial. Okay. Well,
it occurred to all the Black people.
If you had a Black buddy
Right.
or somebody working there that could tip you off to that, then you avoid stubbing your toe and falling down very publicly like we have here.
That's the tricky thing, though,
Right.
because didn't we read in that article that they do have a black person there? Tobias Picker does have a black buddy that's affirming the issues.
I missed that part. Thank you. I didn't know that part. But yeah, that's not to say that if you have an all-white staff that you shouldn't be putting in the effort.
Right.
What I'm saying is it will be much easier for you moving forward if you have people of color in the room, on staff, on the payroll, helping you to make these decisions. You'll get farther, I think.
The challenge is that when a lot of these institutions do that, they find the palatable black, or the black that can tell everyone, see, I'm not racist. We won't go there today. I'm thinking of, shout out to you. I won't say your name. Shout out to you. Let's get into the Trilloquy.
We know that this flag is drenched with our blood. As we know, this country was built on the black backs of black people across this country. And if we don't have it, you ain't gonna have it either, because we gonna tear it up. That's what they saying. They know what they've done to us. All across this country, they know what they've done to us.
Our little transition clip there came from Fannie Lou Hamer. Scott, again, when we're talking about how long fought this battle has been when it comes to black classical music and getting it all on the stage and all of that stuff, it's a microcosm of the bigger issues, okay? Quickly, we have the Chauvin trial happening, right now. Only thing I want to say about it is that, and I think I said this a couple of weeks ago, I feel that collective stress of it. They're already protesting
tonight, right now,
as we're recording this.
Peacefully, we should say.
Good.
Minneapolis is not on fire. Okay, like a lot of people outside of the Twin Cities think that riots are still happening every day here. No, right now it's a peaceful protest.
We'll see.
Right.
I can't really stomach to watch it. I'm not watching and doing all that. I can't bear to do it.
No.
That is a lot of emotional energy for me to watch it. So.
I had only seen clips, and today was the first day that I saw the full thing front to back. And I will never do that again because I don't like snuff films. But it's horrifying. It is absolutely abhorrent and grotesque.
So to everyone here in the Twin Cities and to everyone elsewhere, I wanted to offer this part of the Trilloquy just to say it is okay to be feeling it right now, feeling the stress, feeling the anxiety. I'm always on this podcast talking about using gratitude as your means. I definitely still believe in that. I'm also affirming that this is a very fucking stressful time.
It
so
is.
There's that. Okay. Who I really need to just throw the finger at, I almost said throw some trills at, as to be on theme, but to really just, Georgia is so ghetto. Let's think about Fannie Lou Hamer, what she was talking about way back when, and here we are living through it again. Stacey Abrams went down there and got people voting, got people the ability to really participate in what should be foundational, what is allegedly foundational to the United States, to our government, to our structure. And those white people just had to fix that right up, didn't they?
Right.
I mean, this happened quickly. I have an article here from the Washington Post. There are so many aspects to this this anti-voters' right legislation down there that's ridiculous. This is something that I wanted to bring up just to highlight how pernicious it is. The title of this is Opinion: Georgia Republicans' ban on giving voters water epitomizes the GOP's disturbing priorities. What could be so dangerous about letting these people who are standing in line for hours to vote have a little bit of comfort of a damn bottled water?
Yeah. What?
Much less some of the other things that I've been seeing, things concerning rolling back provisions when it comes to mail-in voting. Of course, voter ID issues going through.
Cutting the number of polls and the number of drop boxes, all these sorts of things. I guess if you if you need to go and get water or food, or you need to go to the bathroom, then maybe you won't get back in line.
Right.
So yeah, it's so obvious. I mean, and clearly members of the GOP there want to come out and say, well, no, it's adding more protections. It's adding, and then they want to start big upping, gaslighting you into it, right?
It's not just Georgia that is messing around. We're hopping around to a few different places today. I'm reading an article here. Again, all of this will be in the description. This is from The Guardian. Arkansas and South Dakota pass bans targeting transgender minors.
That'll learn them.
So we were talking, when we were talking about Lil Nas X, we're talking about these parents who say, oh, well, the negative impressions, and how I always say it is a parent's responsibility. Mm-hmm. That is your child. Mm-hmm. That's what I say about this. That is that child does not belong to the state. That child is under the care of those parents. And those people act like parents are out here just trying to make their kids trans, just trying to indoctrinate them into something. Just the violence that people from the outside, they will protect that fetus. Everything about that fetus. But as soon as a person is out here and wants to affirm themselves,
then you're on your own.
That's a problem. That's a problem. Even here beyond the Chauvin trial, Scott, there's some very ugly things happen legislatively in Minnesota. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Right. There was I'm reading here from the story online that you can find it in lots of places. But the Washington Post is reporting that the Minnesota Supreme Court has ordered a new trial for a man convicted of raping a woman who was drunk. The justices ruled that the state's definition of mentally incapacitated does not include voluntary inebriated victims, meaning in order for it to be rape during inebriation, the woman would have to have unwittingly been given alcohol or some other drug. So if she willingly drinks and goes beyond a certain point, it's no longer rape. He's going to get this. I don't even know this man's name. I'm not going to repeat it, but evidently will get a new trial.
And I'm looking at
what sort of precedent?
I'm looking at the date of this. So this is the one I'm looking at says March 26th. So we're in the middle of Women's History Month. Think about the history of women who, A, have been afraid to speak out against rape and sexual violence, sexual assault. B, the ones who have and have been dragged through the mud and defamed. And women's history, let's talk for a second about Monica Lewinsky. As much as everyone liked to joke and say different things, how could she go get a job?
Her life was ruined.
What was her life like? How did she make it? How did she survive? And so in light of all of that history, we have things like this, and it just shows how slowly, how just incrementally things can change and transform a whole society. It's really scary. It's really scary to see what is law, what is in the books, what is being allowed to be put in the books. It makes it hard not to want to just, as I always joke around in this opus, even go down to the Bahamas, work at McDonald's.
Think about the precedent that this sets going forward, though, and we already have instances where we tell women, well, what were you wearing?
Right.
And how were you acting? Were you dancing provocatively? Were you shouldn't have gotten yourself into that situation. Whereas, we teach the women, our young girls, to behave a certain way to be safe. Mm-hmm. What are we doing with the young men? What
They're not doing a goddamn thing. And it's pitiful.
Is it the boys will be boys philosophy writ large? What?
Because those boys who grew up in these structures now are in positions of power where they get to extend that boys will be boys violent discourse into law. If it's not policing a woman's body, what is she wearing? Now we're policing a woman's ability to go out and have a good time, for goodness sake. We're saying that a woman should not drink alcohol if she plans on having sex.
No.
That's basically what this is.
I know. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that it says no. Don't drink if you plan on having sex.
What if
I'm worried about the precedent.
What if the arts, Scott, can be the light on the top of this hill? What if the arts, if anything, is far away from liberation, from actual progress, I would say is what we call classical music. What if the arts could really sort out all of this stuff? Get these James Levines out of here. We actually address racial equity and what it means. We put money and other resources toward Black-led, women-led, and people of color-led initiatives that can allow us to do our thing. If y'all at the Met and the Chicago Symphony and X, Y, and Z want to continue with the Beethoven and the Brahms, let us do our thing. What if we could be that? That's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me from selling all of these computers and microphones and leaving. That's what keeps me from doing that, thinking that we can be the example. We are all the leaders of our own movements. It's something that my Buddhist practice teaches, something that you can get from anywhere. You don't have to be a part, you don't have to be looking toward a leader, I'll say, to be a part of change. We can all do that. We all, in our individual ways, in the different circles that we go through, we can be that change. And if we aren't doing what we can on the ground, that's how we have stuff like this. That's how we have Georgia making sure that folks can't vote in response to Stacey Abrams doing everything she could. Arkansas and South Dakota with the trans people not being able to get their medical needs. And then of course we're talking about what's going on in Minnesota in many different ways. When we don't speak out against things when we see it, when you see the woman at the bar who's going home with somebody who maybe she doesn't know, but you're like, oh, that's not my business.
Yeah.
That's how those things multiplied by a populace turn into legislation and law and normalization of things that we have to fight against. It seems like sometimes we're taking steps backwards. So as we wrap up here, again, this last opus of the TRILLOQUY podcast for Women's History Month, I brought in a quote by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that resonated with me, and maybe it'll resonate with you. She says, "Justice is about making sure that being polite is not the same thing as being quiet. In fact, oftentimes, the most righteous thing you can do is shake the table." Scott, I appreciate your shaking the table with me here.